this is Crockett, and I'm going to interview her today about her experience in Japan. So, how long ago was it when you lived in Japan?
We lived in Japan from July of 2008 to July of 2010. So we have been back home for 5 years now.
Okay, how diverse was the culture?
Well, the Japanese culture is, they have a very strong cultural identity. And so you don't see a large diversity in Japan. You see the Japanese culture, and then some other cultures have made it into the foods or the words that people say, but overall, the Japanese culture is very strong.
Okay, what was your favorite food that was very unique to Japan?
I liked a lot of foods that I didn't expect to like. Um, Ramen was very good there. It is not like the packages you buy at the grocery store here. It was delicious. I liked tonkatsu and onigiri and udon. I liked I liked a lot of different foods. It's hard to choose one.
Yeah. Do you know any phrases that you can say in Japanese?
I can speak very basic Japanese. I have forgotten a lot of what I learned, but I'm trying to teach my daughter some of the basic words, words for animals, or um, body parts like hana, me, mimi, kuchi, yubi. Um, One thing that we heard a lot while we were there was like uh, expressions that something was really great, and they have lots of different words for that. Like kakui means cool, and subarashi means that's awesome. Um, so I remember a lot of those basic phrases, but I couldn't have a conversation probably.
Yeah. Do they dress like we do?
They do. Um, the Japanese were kind of occupied after World War II by America, and so a lot of the Western culture influenced Japanese culture after that. So they have grocery stores, they have Western clothing, they have, cars and it's a very modern society, and it has a lot of Western influences.
Yeah. What are the hobbies that are common there?
Well, there's a wide variety of hobbies, just like there is in the US, but people are very serious about their hobbies. So if they choose to do something, then they buy the best equipment and they spend a lot of time training and learning about it. And we had friends who were photographers and they had very nice equipment and they took awesome pictures. We had friends who were painters. We met a lady who was a weaver and she had 2 or 3 looms in her garage. We had a friend who was a surfer. We had a friend who was a snowboarder. There's a lot of different hobbies there that people really get into, and there are like cultural centers where people will go and meet with others who share that same hobby, and they'll even have displays at certain times of year, and you can go and see what people in the community have done. Um, they have calligraphy is a common hobby, and painting. Uh, there's a wide variety.
Yeah. Um, how did your career as a teacher go?
When my husband studied Japanese at Eastern, his teacher, his professor, knew that I taught English here in the U.S., and she said, if you ever want to go live in Japan, this is a great way to do it. The Japanese government has a program where they bring in native speakers, and you're placed in a school or like a city hall, and then you'll go out from there and teach at elementary schools or um, maybe even some businesses. So I was based in a Japanese high school, and I spent most of my time at that one high school. And then I would visit 2 or 3 different schools on a kind of a rotating basis, maybe once a week or maybe once every month. I would go to some other schools also.
Okay. What did you tell people? I mean, what would you tell people about that community?
I would tell them that I loved our experience in Japan, and if you get a chance to travel to Japan, I think you should do it. But I also think if you ever get the chance to travel outside the U.S., you should do that anywhere. And if you ever get the chance to live outside of the U.S., it was an amazing experience, and I highly recommend that to anyone, regardless of what you want to do with the rest of your life. Experience life outside the U.S.
Okay. What is the biggest difference between Japan and the U.S.?
I would say the cultural identity. Japan has a very strong um, system of teaching their history and their traditional arts, and people there know their history, and they all kind of have an identity that you would expect to find in any part of Japan. And in the U.S., I feel like our cultural identity and our history, we learn about it, but we don't really all have that in common across the whole U.S. And it's really based on pop culture in the U.S., whereas in Japan, they've relied on their history and the long traditions that they have.
Yeah. In the housing and transportation, how is that?
Well, we lived in a house that was very old, and it was not heated or air conditioned. We had kerosene heaters that when we were home we could turn on, and they would heat the house. But for the most part, we lived without those basic comforts. And we would wake up in the middle of the night because we were so cold, even with an electric blanket. Um, our transportation, we had a car for the second year we were there, but we would also travel by train, and we used the bullet train when we traveled to Tokyo, and we used the local trains when we wanted to go to a local town nearby. And then we had Japanese friends that would drive us to different places that they wanted to show us. Or we used our bikes a lot. I walked to work a lot. My husband walked to work or biked. So it was convenient, even during the time that we didn't have a car. It was convenient to get around.
In the education system, how was the schools there, and what were they like, and how is the U.S. education different from the Japanese education?
Well, in Japan, high school is not mandatory, but most people do go. It's very competitive to get into the schools that you want because the high schools are based on careers. So I know in our area there was an agricultural high school, there was a business high school, and there was I think there was a fishery high school. So the school that I was based at was an academic high school. So the students who went to my base school, they expected to go to university. That was their plan. And they had to take an entrance exam to get into that high school. So it was competitive, and it was pretty stressful, and students had to prepare for that. And if they didn't get into that high school, they had to have a backup plan.